Well, we're going to get going here. So we got people coming online, and I want to thank you all for joining this month's Truth Talks. For those of you that are new, I'm Fred Caldwell, and my friend David Weekley's here that is going to be our speaker tonight, my guest. But Truth Talk started from a year ago when I was on a flight coming back from Chicago after a knee replacement and had an encounter with God. And in that process, God really spoke to me about being more bold about my faith and being more bold in our witness for his purposes. And so as we're heading into this season, Christmas season, and I'm thinking about the great gifts that God has given us, I started thinking about what it means for us to be a steward of those gifts and what our call is to give back. And as many of you have experienced, giving is such a blessing when you give. And I couldn't think of anyone better to speak on this topic than my friend David Weekley, who's the founder of David Weekley Homes. For those of you that don't know David, I will tell you that number one, he's a man of great character and a person that has an incredible both business mind and a call from God to be an example, I believe, to many, many people about what it means to be a steward and what it means to be an effective manager of God's resources and to build the kingdom. David has built the largest private home building company in the United States. He's actually one of my customers, so I'm always thankful for David Weekley Homes. They're just a great builder, and we're so thankful that they build in our communities and many others, not only in Houston and Texas, but around the United States. They build incredibly high quality homes. He's one of the best marketers I know, has a brilliant marketing mind. And again, they have in our surveys, and I think David would affirm this probably, our survey results always come back with the highest brand quality rating. It's for David Weekley Homes repeatedly. So it's just a great credit to David and his leadership and his entire leadership team. David has been involved in a lot of different organizations and foundations, and I could read off the list, and I've only got about half of them or a third of them, I suspect. But one of them that I'm familiar with is Alpha, and I was on the board with David. David and some other friends of mine asked me to be on this board, and I was so encouraged by David's leadership on that board in an organization that had been struggling, and David was able to step in and reset the board, and Alpha now is doing a phenomenal job under great leadership, and it all has to do with David stepping in and kind of repositioning Alpha in the Houston area, and now Alpha is doing so well, and I just credit David and his leadership and vision for something that he felt like could operate more effectively, and sure enough it could, and it has. And finally, I want to give you a little more background about David in regards to his foundation. He's chaired the David Weekley Family Foundation, which I believe your daughter now works for. I think David and
she runs it. I work for her.
Okay, so David works for his daughter at the David Weekley Foundation, but they have an interesting model, and I'll just read it. It's called Venture Philanthropy. So we'll have David explain what that means. But the investing of treasure, time, and talent to grow nonprofits and social enterprises serving the poor and the disadvantaged. And I know David has a real heart for that. And their international portfolio concentrates on improving education, health, and livelihoods with a focus on helping young, innovative organizations scale up their proven models to reduce global poverty. So a big focus for the foundation, for David personally, for his daughter and their family. So he's got degrees from Trinity. He's a Texas guy. He's been married to Bonnie for 44 years, I believe, 3 children, 7 grandchildren. So I'm so excited, David, to have you today. And I want to kind of launch this. I've known you a long time. David, by the way, just while we're on this, I just want to thank you for being such a great counsel to me. And I know to many others, you have poured into a lot of guys like me, and encouraged us and challenged us. If you've ever been in a meeting with David Weekley, one thing I will tell you, you will leave there challenged. And so hopefully all of you that are on this call today will feel challenged by his comments. That's always my experience, as David challenges me in my walk with Christ. He challenges me in my faith. So David, in leading this great home building business, can you give us just a little background on how this company evolved and how you started? You started very young and in the home building business. Can you give us just kind of a little backdrop on the business side for a minute?
Yeah, we got started in the late 70s, did very well, went through the mid 80s, almost lost the company. And that kind of impacted my vision and thoughts about money and materialism and everything that I thought was the most important thing in my world. And then I remember I made a promise to God, give me one more boom and I won't screw the next one up. Right. And sure enough, we came back in the early 90s and it was then I decided to kind of give half my time and half my income over to nonprofit work. And fortunately, I was, I've been financially blessed beyond, I've always been blessed beyond what I deserve, but I was also blessed beyond my needs in a great way. And so I've been able to do that for the last 28 years now or so. And so to do that, I had to go out and find someone to run the company if I was going to give half my time. So fortunately, God blessed that decision. And after a couple of false starts, I found the right man who was able to grow the company from 300 million to we'll do just under 2.5 billion this year. And it was due to God's blessing and this man's work. And as they say, you only have to pick a few right people, right? You pick the right spouse and pick the right partners, but make a few great selections and things work out.
Right. So David, let me ask you about this. So I've heard you say this many times about this. I wanted to contribute half my time, half my resources. Can you kind of go back to that? What the driver that was? Kind of what was the driver in that?
Well, it's when I was 21, I went to the mayor's prayer breakfast and heard this fellow named Stanley Tam, who wrote a book called God Owns My Business. Yeah. And I heard it at 21. I thought it was stupid. And then again, but I ended up getting his book and I kind of read it and I said, that's kind of interesting. And kind of had a Holy Spirit nudge. And then later on, after I'd gone down, to the depths and survived and come back, I kind of remembered that. And there was just something about 50-50 and being partners with God I thought was a pretty cool idea. And it also gave me a lot of motivation because I found out once I'd made some money that I was not really as money motivated or driven. Once I had enough, whatever that is, it kind of lost its allure. But then when I started doing a lot of philanthropy and giving away and getting more involved in kingdom work, I got my motivation for the company and growth and doing well as a business as well. The other thing is at that point in time, I really moved from being me focused. I mean, who could be more me focused than someone that names their company David Weekley Homes, right? But I kind of went from being me focused to being other focused at that same time. And that's when we started really working on building a great team and being focused on the employees there. And that's been a major thrust for me as well the last 25 years. So I try to bring my faith, not just into my giving, but also into the company. And we hired marketplace chaplains and did a lot of different things to create an organization that while it wasn't overtly Christian, it was Christian in spirit. And so I created that kind of work environment, which also helped grow the company. And again, continue to bless and move that flywheel.
So I find it interesting too, David, you say those things like marketplace ministry where you brought in chaplains and really how God's been working in you. And then you look at the history of the company. I think y'all have been on Fortune's best places to work list 14 times in a row. And they're considered one of the best companies in the United States to work for. And would you relate that back to your faith even and the way you're kind of leading and some of that or what?
For sure. I mean, until I got others focused, I really didn't care about those 1,500 team members there. So it was all part of a pretty major life shift in my early 40s to become other focused. And that's when I realized it's, in Rick Warren's book, Purpose Driven Life, the first words, it's not all about you. And so, I realized that I was a little slow in that, but I finally realized that. And that's when things really took off in a whole lot of ways.
So let's talk about this other focus in terms of your giving. So it's interesting too to me that you've linked growing. You got to a certain point, it sounds like, and said, well, the utility of the financial resources kind of losing value, kind of law of diminishing returns. But then you kind of realized, I'd like to do more. I'd like to give more, and to give more, if we build our business, we can give more. Am I tracking that right? Is that?
Yes. Yeah,
So,
and it got me re-energized in the business because I was kind of losing some energy because I realized that my motivation had been about money, and once I had enough, and you know, we all define that differently, then I kind of, why am I doing this? Why am I working this hard and doing all this, et cetera? So it was really when I made that switch that I got really excited again and motivated about my business and motivated about adjusting my business to be more focused on the team rather than just myself. So it was a pretty major pivot.
right. Well, let's shift a little bit into that. So on the giving side, how do you decide where you're going to give? We've got a lot of people on this call that are representing leading nonprofits and ministries and whatnot. And at the same time, I know we've got a number of donors that are on this call. So when you think about, what do I do with these resources now? We're building this phenomenal company, this business that's generating great resources. How do we deploy them? And in your case, you're saying we give 50+%. So how do you decide how to do that?
The first thing I think is to really search your heart and have a plan, and really not just be reactive based upon your friend Susie or Sam talking to you, and instead of relational gifts, having it be stewardship gifts. And to me, the concept of stewardship is kind of what I live under and for now. You know, in Luke 12:48 says, to whom, you know, much is given, much is demanded. And I think that's not just writing a check, but it's taking what you know and who you are and your experience, your time, talent, and your resources, putting all those together, and you can have a lot more impact. And so in terms of who, first, does it match with my interest and where I find the most passion personally? You know, is it a good matchup? Okay. And secondly, I think in giving, you got to marry heads and hearts, right? So you got to have the heart pull, but I've also got to see, is it really an efficient use of God's resources? I mean, for some reason, unbeknownst to me, God decided to allow me to amass resources with the talents he gave me. And I find it amazing that so many great business leaders have one head when they're making money and another head when they're giving money. And they don't take as much care in giving it as they do in making it. And it's almost like, you know, writing a check or giving a tip to someone. And I don't think, and you know, 10% is like a tip amount or something, right? The stewardship. So, I mean, I don't think the investing of God's resources ought to be handled like a tip. I think it needs to be very thoughtful and invested and do our homework. And of course, it takes some time to do that. That's the reason I decided I had to give half my time as well as half my money, because if you don't have the time to really look into that or have the discipline to make that room in your life, then it's hard to make really wise giving decisions.
Right. So, David, there's a lot in what you just said, and you have challenged me so much in this area, and I've learned a ton from you in this regard, that I'd really like you to kind of maybe dive into a little bit more in terms of how you evaluate. We've got a lot of nonprofits on the call, and I'm sure there's a bunch that'll watch this recording. So as you think about, you said a couple things. One is your personal passion, and I think we can all relate to that. What are we passionate about? What's God calling us into? What lanes? But then you kind of said something that I think is different that some of us may think about. You actually are talking about the organization itself that you might give to. Is that right? I mean, in terms of where they are, and you might talk about that in terms of, and where you have played historically, because I think that's pretty interesting too, because you've got kind of again, you're not parking your business brain. You're saying, how do I leverage this business brain, the mind God's given me, my experiences? And you've kind of you've kind of chosen a path that's very interesting, I think.
Well, it's also where is our own individual giftedness. You know, as we're always good as human beings of knowing about what our weaknesses are. Hopefully, as we get older, we're honest enough to say, here are where my strengths are. And so we also find the most joy if we operate in our strengths, right? And so through experience over the years, you know, I'd go on some boards, or I'd be on a hospital board at the medical center, sit around this huge table, 20 people. They were all brighter than me. They were all, you know, great folks. After a while, I said, I don't need to be here. I'm not really being additive. I mean, I could put it on my resume, but you know, I come down here, they feed me lunch, great, I'm on this great hospital board, but I'm not really being additive. And so I feel like I've got to put myself in places where I can be additive. You know, put me in, coach. Let me do something. Let me make something happen. And so for me, I found that lane being smaller organizations as an entrepreneur, from 500,000 revenue to say 5 million. And usually organizations in that size, they've got wonderful, passionate leaders, but oftentimes they're missing some parts of business, right? I mean, there's no way that they can be complete in their business knowledge because they're young, passionate missionaries. And so I can come in and either help them individually or help them with some other consultants, or help them get a fundraising plan, or help them get a digital marketing plan, or do some different things that can help them move their organization forward. So really capacity building is important to me. And I can't tell you the number of people that have come in and they're looking for a check for the gala, but as I spend time with them, I can see that, yes, you do need a check for the gala, but you know what, you can really use a broader fundraising plan.
And so, David, for you to do that means a lot of time, doesn't it?
Yeah, half my time.
You're not just writing a check, right?
No, half my time or more. I mean, I'll see 5 to 10 people a week that are, you know, looking for funds. And I've been doing that for 25 years, 28 years. So no, I've seen a lot. What they say takes 10,000 hours to become an expert. I figured out once I got 25,000 hours in nonprofit work, and I'm still just make mistakes every day. so it's you know, it's hard. It's not as easy for me as just writing a check, because I really do feel the responsibility of being God's investment advisor, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, and again, I've been through this process with you in a couple of different areas, and you bring to the table a fresh set of eyes, which is so valuable, with a business mind and an acumen, and yet a love for God and the kingdom. And those two are married.
But Fred, I want to say that most of the people on the call, I mean, everybody on the call knows that they have strengths in different areas, and they have their own platform and their own influence. And so, you know, when I talk to some people and say, well, I really don't know how to get involved or what to do, or they're really selling themselves short and not understanding the incredible impact they can have on organizations.
Right.
Because even say you're a mid-level manager, oil and gas guy, what you've learned over the last 20 years or 30 years is so far ahead of what a $2 million a year nonprofit organization has in terms of management or human resources or budgeting, or just all those different things that come naturally to those of us in business. So, I mean, my advice would be is to get in the game. Yeah. And start doing something.
Actively engage.
Yes.
Not just write a check, but actively engage. Yeah.
Yeah, and try one and see where it goes, and you know, you'll figure out where your lanes are and what you do well.
Yeah. So we got a couple of questions. I want to throw one out because it kind of is back to where we started from. The question is, how long did it take Bonnie to get on board with the 50-50 thing?
Well, fortunately, Bonnie and I knew each other since high school, and she, like me, never expected to have the resources that we've had. So she's about as low maintenance a wife as you could imagine. So for her, it was not a problem. Now, when we lost our house in the downturn, that was a little bit more of a problem, you know. but on the way back, it was all good. Yeah.
Well, you and I are married to a similar model. That's been Susan, high school, and we didn't start with much, so
Right.
we're thankful for anything that God's provided. Hey, another question that's come into it, it's kind of where we are right now, is what's been one of the more rewarding gifting experiences you've had?
Oh, it was probably getting involved in Christian camping. Never forget, I got a phone call, and it was at my desk, and I picked it up, and this is Anthony, and I'm with Camp Eagle, and we're in $3 million worth of debt, and they're going to foreclose in 30 days, and I'm moving the phone farther and farther away from my ear, and then but I just heard in his voice. I said, well, send me your information. Let me look over it. So he sent it. I looked over it. It was pretty interesting. They had $3 million in debt, but they had 2,000 acres and all these rooms, and it was a good deal. They just had to have somebody to bail them out. And so I got a couple of friends over, Terry Looper and Rusty Walter, and Anthony came, and his wife came, because they've been living hand to mouth for years. And we heard the story, and we basically, kicked out the old board, brought in the new board, paid off the debt. And the camp that was having 5,000 people through it a year is now having 30,000 people through it a year. And it's cash flow break even. So what could we be better than investing? And that was a lot of time, as well as a check, as well as some talent, in figuring out how to right this ship and set it on its way. Since then, we bought 2 or 3 more camps, and I've turned them over to other boards. Once we got them righted, we turned them over to a local board, and they're on their way.
Right. So how much so it sounds like the way you give and you're telling us, and it's so encouraging to really use our minds and think through, be a good steward, use our experiences about what we're going to give. And then how do you balance that with God's leading in that? Does your mind tell you one thing sometimes, and then God kind of informs, maybe do a little more? Or, does the Spirit lead you in some of this, or is it pretty much it's how we would approach a solution of a business issue?
Well, I naturally quickly approach it from a business perspective, and then sometimes get jerked up. And David, I know this doesn't meet your normal standards, but I want you to get involved in this. Or sometimes my wife, we're involved in her private school, and she said, they asked me to get on the board. I said, I don't need to do that, et cetera. She said, David, you need to go do that. And so I went and did it. Again, sat through a few meetings, great, smart people around the table. Thought I wasn't, I didn't have anything I could add. And sure enough, a few meetings later, they asked me to head up the capital campaign, and I was able to be additive and bring something to the table. So to me, we each have a stewardship of our affluence, our money, but we also have a stewardship of our influence. And we all know lots of people after 20, 30, 40 years in business and in church and social and this and that. So how can we use that influence to further the kingdom? And I think oftentimes, people might say, well, I don't have the money David has, or I can't do this, or I can't do that. A lot of people. and how do we best use that influence as well? Right.
I'm gonna come back to something else here, but I've got another question that came in I really like. As a young business owner, this person says, I often consider getting involved in nonprofits. The challenge is that overcoming the idea of me being away from the company and a disservice to my company and its associates. And did you ever feel you're in that position, and how'd you overcome that? So this person's saying, hey, is it going to be a disservice if I go spend time out here and helping nonprofits, charities, ministries, as opposed to spending that time on the business? How'd you balance that? And as you're growing a business?
Yeah, and I didn't balance it very well. I'm kind of the old generation where I just worked harder and worked longer, and probably didn't spend the amount of time with my family I should have when they were growing up. And I really appreciate the younger generation having a much more balanced approach that I think is entirely appropriate. So I don't have a good answer for that. I would say get involved in one as opposed to a bunch, and starting out and just tip your toe into one, especially these days with Zoom. You don't have to go travel to a meeting and spend 4 hours. You can get a lot done in an hour or two. And so, and I get involved in something that's that's in your passion area and that is local and that could use whatever you can bring to the table. And not just because you get invited on a board. That's not the reason to go on a board. It's what's a good fit, not just because somebody happened to invite you.
Yeah. I heard one time, David, you may agree with this, but I maybe like you, so many times you get asked to serve on these boards and whatnot. And I'd end up on all these boards, and I started realizing, I'm not going to do any of these boards justice because it's spread too thin. And somebody told me one time, they said, you saying no means somebody else gets to say yes. Always remember that. My saying no means somebody else gets to say yes, because that may not be my passion just because somebody asked. And so it's good counsel on your part. Just, limit your involvement.
The other thing is depending upon kind of, if you like the organization, you could potentially give them as much input and help by meeting with them a few times and finding out where you can best help, rather than having to be on a board that meets 6 times a year for 2 or 3 hours. It's kind of one of the reasons I was never that good on a church committee, right? I mean, a lot of people come, talk, etc., and I just found that that wasn't my sweet spot.
Yeah.
So I think, again, trying some things and finding your sweet spot is the important point. There's a Corinthians 7:24 says, brothers, each man is responsible to God shall remain in the situation God has called him to. And so that kind of gave me permission when I was going through, some of my searching on, okay, how much time do I give? Do I go get in ministry? What am I supposed to do with my faith, Lord? And where am I supposed to go? And I think that verse kind of gave me permission to stay in the lane that God called me to, and yet still go figure out how to do ministry, how to help, how to use my strengths, how to use my platform. I'm a lot farther ahead today than if I would have gone into ministry at 43 in terms of the number of people and the impact I can have for the kingdom.
Yeah, right. By staying in your lane, your experiences, your passion, experiences, and gifting. And
right.
That's a good word, David. Let me ask you this. We're in a remarkable time in all human history with this COVID pandemic. How have you seen that impacting the organizations you support? And do you have any thoughts for that for leaders of nonprofits that might be on this call today in terms of handling this new, world that we're in right now?
Yeah, I've done 2 or 3 kind of webinars on that topic, one with Rice and one with some other folks, but I can only kind of mirror what my experience was going through that downturn and through a very difficult time. And you find that you can get yourself locked up where you kind of don't know what to do and don't know where to go. And should I go left? Should I go right? Should I cut people? Should I not cut people, etc.? And you just can't afford to get locked up. You have to come up with a plan and move. And you might not be right, but you got to do something. And it's been fascinating because I've seen a lot of leaders in the nonprofit areas pivot, and this be the most powerful time that they've had in terms of changing and adjustment. And, as someone said, never let a good crisis go to waste, right? Because you can make changes in your organization you cannot make at any other time, because the momentum to keep doing the same thing is very, very strong. And so COVID allows you to do things you wouldn't do otherwise. And at the same time, I've seen some other organizations that maybe had the financial wherewithal or ability to not have to move because they could continue to be funded by donors or whatever and not change much. And it's been disappointing in those cases to not see them move in ways that they could. So to me, using this time as a real opportunity to get things done in your organization that would be hard to do otherwise. And really, one of the things I focus on most in determining where to give funds is the leadership. I've had the experience where I've given to great models and name brand ministries or whatever, but if they didn't have a great leader, those funds wouldn't be used well. At the same time, if I give and there's a great leader in place, even if the model's not perfect or they're trying to figure something out or they had a bad year, I've found over years of history that giving to the right leadership pays dividends and creates more value than than just giving to the name brand organization.
And that kind of goes right in hand with a question that came in asking about what you look for specifically in organizations and whatnot. And so what you're, as we know, probably in a lot of different areas, it's first that leader, isn't it? It's who is the leader, and you have confidence in their ability to lead. And then what are some of the other things, David, too?
Well, the challenges with the nonprofit leader is that, we as the donors are their customers in a way. I mean, they're doing different ministries, but they've got to take care of the donors. And so oftentimes it's very hard for them to be honest and transparent and authentic with their donors. And yet those organizations that I give the most to and get the most engaged with are those that, instead of coming to me and saying, everything's great, we're making through it, it's wonderful, wonderful, come to me and say, man, I've got a real issue here. I've got a problem. All of our stuff in Africa, here's what's happening with the exchange rate, or here's what's happening here, or I can't go do this, or do you have any ideas, or can you turn me on to somebody, or I'm at a loss here. And so the authenticity of the leader is so important. And it's hard because leaders are in a very tough position because they want to say everything's doing great. And at the same time, understanding your donors in a way to know those that want to know what's really happening so they can, feed into it, as opposed to just showing the happy face. And everything's great when everything can't be great. I mean, these are very difficult times.
How about the financial side, David? I mean, you mentioned the camp, and I know your camp ministry has been such a call for you. And again, you supported JH and others, and your impact's been huge. But what are other things you're looking at in terms of?
Well, usually I look for three things. Is there high leverage? If I give $1, can they get $10 worth of work done? Right. I'm a real estate guy and I use debt. Right. I like leverage. So how efficient and effective are they with the dollars that are given? So does it have high leverage? Is it sustainable? Is it something that if I give them funds for something, are they building some type of sustainability into their operation? I don't ever want to be the guy that they're dependent upon for operating, because I won't be here forever. So how are they structuring themselves to ensure that they can get the funds needed to operate and be sustainable over time? Then the third one for me is scalability. Do they have a model? Do they have a system? Do they have some way that they can really scale and grow the business? My business, I've scaled it over time over the last 40 years and grown it. And so I'm kind of a growth guy. I'm an entrepreneur. So is the organization in a place to where they can scale? So I look at leverage, sustainability, and scalability is what motivates me to get involved with an organization. That's probably not true for everybody and doesn't need to be. That's just what turns my clock.
Well, and again, I think you're giving, and the way you give is interesting because it's unique in my experiences, in that you give, but your goal is to give not so that you repeatedly give over and over, but you give in a way and provide strategic help so that they can become sustainable. And on that sustainability piece, David, are there examples, or are there things that you feel like you see in common with various ministries and nonprofits where they all have a weakness that you've seen in common in terms of sustainability? Are there some common themes in that to becoming sustainable?
That's a good question, but a hard question, because each nonprofit, each ministry is so very different. One fault that I see, especially for new young nonprofits, is they become too dependent on a few large gifts to get going, and they don't have a breadth of donors. When you joined Alpha, right, and the Alpha board, there were 6 of us that were funding it to get it going. But then how do we spread it? How do we broaden the base? So to me, as a donor, if you come in and you're a major donor for a small organization as they get started, one of my responsibility to ensure the sustainability is to help them broaden the base and not become dependent upon me. So how do you create independence?
Yeah, that's so good. So good. Hey, you and a guy named Peter Greer wrote a great book. If those of you that are on this call haven't read it, I encourage you to read it. It's called The Giver and the Gift. And you get into both sides of this, which I think is fascinating from a donor perspective and from the organizational perspective of of how each side of that can work well together. And one part of that Peter addresses that I'd love to hear your thoughts on are how nonprofits can manage donor relationships more effectively. You mentioned one thing, and that's transparency. And but what are some other things you see that if you look at best of class out there that you work with that are handling their donors well, what would you say that looks like, and what would be your counsel on that, David?
You know what's so hard is that there's a power imbalance, right? The donor's got the ability to write a check. The nonprofit needs the check. And so part of my part, as I wrote about the giver, it was how to operate in a way in a partnership to not, and to reduce that power imbalance into where I want to walk alongside somebody in partnership, and I want them to share with me the hard parts and the joys and everything else. And I want to help them along the way. If it's just, I write a check and I get a Christmas gift and, David, you're so great. I mean, those of us that can write checks can get pumped up pretty easily, right? And I don't think that's the way it's supposed to work. I think the way it's supposed to work is that it's a gift for me to be able to come alongside a ministry leader that's giving their life to this ministry. And I just get to come alongside and be additive to them. And so as a nonprofit leader, I would say that the goal would be is how can you bring your donors alongside to where they feel like they're engaged and they're a partner in the ministry. We do a lot of stuff internationally. When I talk to the folks in Africa, I say, look, send me a video of what's happening in the village when you deliver the medicine. Let me see it. Let me feel it. Not a fancy, I don't need a big produced movie. Give me a 1 minute video of what you're doing on your iPhone. Yeah. Bring me along. Allow me to feel like I'm part of the ministry. And so the best nonprofit leaders bring me along. And so I'm engaged. I feel like I'm a part of hope. I know what's going on. I'm with them. I'm not in Africa right now, but I'm with them. I see what they're doing. So to me, it's a relational aspect. Young Life calls it taking donors seriously. To where it's not just I get a check and check off that box and I'll talk to you a year from now. I mean, that's not a positive relational experience for either party. Right. And there are some ways, especially digitally now, it can be so efficient. Yeah. I mean, you take one minute video and you put on, 20 different, openings to it. Hey, David. Hey, Bill. Hey, Fred. And then you end it and you're done. I mean, this isn't rocket science.
Yeah. Well, I know you and I received a video from one that we both support, and I thought it was very well done because it took about, I don't remember how long that video was. It might've been 3 minutes. But it was very personal. It was addressed to you or to me or whoever it was, and it went through exactly what had happened because of various things that had been funded and whatnot. And I thought that was very well done. And it was very effective. And it's to your point, in today's world, there's no reason that organizations can't deliver a video and digital content that tells you what's going on in their organization and how they're doing.
The other thing that I want to mention that I really think is important for a donor is to really be mission minded with their checks and not manipulative. I mean, the challenge is if you write a check, you can oftentimes go get an organization to do what you want them to do, but the organization knows best. And so probably only 10% of our grants are for a specific issue rather than the broad organization whereby I'm supporting their leadership, I'm supporting their mission, et cetera. And so I want to go support them to do what they know is best, not tell them what to do, because I don't know. I'm on the outside. There's no way for me to know.
How do you determine how much to give to an organization? Can you give too much to an organization, David? Can a person give too much?
Sure. Normally, I try not to give more than 5 to 10% of an operating budget, even to a small organization, or more than 15 to 20% to a capital campaign. And that's even, my church is building a sanctuary or whatever. That goes for all, because just as you said, giving someone the opportunity to say yes, finding out what the appropriate amount is for you and where you are and where the organization is and where you fit in this campaign and what's important. I was giving to an organization, and I had some family members involved, so I wanted to give anonymously. And it said, okay, you could do that, but they've got to see you as a lead gift as well. So this whole deal, the left hand knows what the right hand's doing it all. And I went through a period in my life where I thought, it was more Christian to give anonymously. And then I understood that the aperture of you giving and your stewardship and your influence has some power in helping others give as well. So this is all a balance, and there aren't any right, wrong answers. The only thing I can tell you is that I never want to be manipulative or create dependency in a nonprofit.
Yeah. And so on that, David, I think a lot of people have a challenge with that. If you're making a gift, do you want people to know it's you or not, or is it better not to? And you said, hey, I've kind of learned over time, but can you kind of dive in a little bit more on that in terms of how do you discern that? Like, do you put your name on it or not?
So on building stuff, I've decided to use the code word grace. So I've got Grace Auditorium or the Grace Building or the Grace. I get the personal affirmation of I took that spot and I did that. It's the Grace. It's not my name. The other thing is I've got family and kids and grandkids now that have to grow up with the visibility of the Weekley name, and I don't want them to have to labor under any more of that than they have to. So I'm sensitive to how all that's done, and I still give some gifts anonymously. It's just it depends upon the situation.
Right. So if you can effectively encourage others to join along and give, I would think that's an appropriate time for us to steward the influence that God has given us.
Exactly.
Is that right? Yeah.
And to get beyond the simplicity of left hand and right hand. They're as you well said, what's appropriate. All this is judgment and prayer and trying to discern God's will.
Yeah. I remember I was struggling with this one time, David. Our dear friend Cloyce, who's probably on this call, Cloyce said, Fred, God knows your heart. You don't need to be concerned because, so much of that's wrapped up in guilt that I'm going to do the wrong thing. And Cloyce said, wait a minute, God knows your motives. So if your motive is right, if I'm giving so that someone's going to pat me on the back, then that's a wrong motive. But if I'm doing it so it really will encourage others to give, then that's an appropriate motive, one would think. Hey, I want to remind people, if you've got a question, put them in. We've got, I may not be seeing all of them, by the way, Amber, but if you've got questions, put them in the chat section, and we'll try to get to them as we go along here. So we're going to land here in just a few minutes. But tell me about you. You mentioned your family on giving. I think for a lot of people on this call, how do you involve your family, engage your family in giving? And has that been a process for you, or did it start at a certain age with kids, or how has that evolved for you over time in terms of family involvement in giving?
First of all, I love the concept. Second of all, it's really hard. And the reason it's hard is, we want our kids, first of all, just like when I saw my dad put his envelope in the plate every Sunday morning, I think giving is caught as well as taught. So I think that the best thing we can do is have our children see us be generous. The other thing is, my son's got 5 kids, my daughter's got 3, they're busy in their career, et cetera. Me wanting them to get really involved in philanthropy, they don't have the bandwidth. And so sometimes I see people, and I have been in the past disappointed and say, look, get on this board, do this, do that. they just don't have the bandwidth. They're in their, 20s to 40s. It's hard. Now, the Greater Houston Community Foundation does a deal, and I'm sure the Christian Foundation does too, where, where you can get with your grandkids and go pack lunches on a Saturday, and you're doing it for, so there's some nice things that you can do that I think are important and worthwhile, where you can do activities at age appropriate ages to show giving back. I ended up sending all my kids to Amigos to go live in Central America for 10 weeks, without any money in tents. So, because they're rich kids. and so how do you best equip rich kids to understand this is not the world, right? We are not, this is not how the world works. So from that, my daughter ended up being a full-time in ministry and a nonprofit leader. And my sons both have great hearts. So, I mean, they're doing it, but I would caution against trying to force it if it's not caught, so to speak. So I'd take some trial balloons and see, but I've got another friend who's a huge giver, and he really wants his daughters to go run the foundation, but they said, Dad, this is a whole lot of money. I don't want to have to be saddled with this. Don't make me do this. I don't want, this is your responsibility. It's not mine.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm really planning on giving while I'm living. And I kind of feel like God gave me the responsibility and the stewardship of these funds. And so I'm going to try to give it as much away as I can for as long as I can. Then I've got a 25-year spend down policy on my foundation.
Well, I'm glad you went there, because I was going to ask you about that. And so very unique. And I'd like you to kind of, because I don't know if people on this call may have understood what you just said. But so many, if you go to financial planners and estate attorneys and whatnot, David, as you have, and others, and and if you start planning out your wills, one of the things that comes up quickly is how much you're getting, how do you transfer your wealth, whatever God gives you, to your children, right? But you're saying something a little different, aren't you, in terms of how you plan to manage what God has provided?
Well, I decided how much to give to my children, and then everything else goes to charity. And that's all booked and done. So, I mean, I picked an amount and said, this is it. And everything else goes to charity. And what the right amount is a discussion we could have for hours. And I've changed my mind 20 times. So I don't know what and that answer is different for everybody. But I think giving while you're living and giving today while you've got your mind, your influence, your affluence, your breath. And this is when it's joyful. I mean, why would you not want to experience the joy of giving now? I mean, and who's going to give it away better than you are? I mean, I just can't imagine, 40 years from now, some board sitting there and some grant officers make proposals, and I don't know what's going on, and it goes a different direction. So I just think that giving out, and it's even, I've got this private company, right? David Weekley Homes. And so what do I do with this private company? Most people end up selling out and having to cash out, or then do they pass it all to their family or whatever. I decided to have a third of the company is now owned by the employees, a third of the company is owned by charitable trust, and a third of the company is owned by the founding families. So I try to come up with a way that hopefully, the people that follow me, and God will decide for sure, but that hopefully those three groups all have aligned interests, and the company continue to be a great private company that takes care of its team, takes care of its customer, and give back to the community in meaningful ways.
And so that generationally, it can continue to give substantially to support the various things that the next generation of leaders may feel called to support. But during your lifetime, I remember you saying this to me one time. You may have said no, but I think the way you said it to me one time was, hey, God gave me the money for whatever reason, and I'm going to give it away. And,
right.
I think that really struck me at the time, and it strikes me again tonight. So we're gonna close up here in a minute. And Dave, just as a final question to you, I'm gonna look over here.
There are a number of good questions I see popping up. I don't know if you're seeing them.
Yeah, there are. Okay, let's take this one. Do you ever move away from an organization because your vision diverges from theirs or because you feel they don't need your help or money anymore? Great
Yes.
question.
Yes. It's
What
okay to stop giving to an organization that you love. And it's okay because it means that they've been able to move beyond you. It means they've broadened their donor base. It means that they've proed up. You know, as I say, I like to be involved in smaller organizations, 500,000 to 5 million. When somebody gets to 20 or $30 million, they're usually a pretty professional organization, and I can't have as much influence on them. I mean, I can't have as much impact because they're already proed up. I mean, they're great. They made, and so I want to invest my time and capacity and money where I can help people make capacity moves, competency moves.
And a lot of that comes back to you being very much an entrepreneur. You're a growth person, right? You like to stay in that lane. And once they get past that initial growth.
Yeah, and they're very, very worthy organizations. It's not that they shouldn't be supported. It's just where I feel called.
Right. Well, and I've seen you do it, and I'm so thankful, David, for all you've done for so many different organizations, ministries, nonprofits. There are so many, both domestically and internationally. Camps, your great passion. You've come in and rescued multiple camps and repositioned them, and now, to your point, that just amazing impact for the kingdom because of you and others that have joined you. And I would say something else. You haven't said it really, David, but I think you're a inspirational type leader. And for some on this call, that may be part of their ministry call, is to bring others in with them. And you've done that with me. You've done that with so many people that you've called into ventures with you that you know, really we're just looking for someone to ask them to get engaged. And maybe you've done some legwork they wouldn't otherwise do or didn't have time to do or hadn't thought about doing. You've done that legwork and they feel confident in you and following your lead. And I think there's others on the call that may have that same type of gifting.
The other thing for the nonprofit leaders, and I talked about the power imbalance, you know, I hope and pray that they can understand that they're giving a gift to someone to allow them to support their organization. That they shouldn't apologize for it. They shouldn't be worried about it. They shouldn't, you know, woe is me, I got to go ask somebody for some money. They're bringing someone a gift to allow them to come alongside and share in the ministry. And so, and you can feel that when I mean, all of a sudden you're dealing with somebody on a partnership basis rather than a bifurcated basis based upon power dynamics. Right.
You know, I'm going to ask you one question that's come up, and I think you've answered it, but just in case you've got a different answer. This person's asked the question a couple of times, so I want to throw it out there, but I think you answered it already. And that's, is there one gift stands out, greatest impact? Would that be your camp gift that you described? Greatest impact gift?
Yes, it would be, and we've multiplied that in a number of camps, and I've learned a skill set, and being able to give to something that then gets self-sustaining and impacts tens of thousands of people is very powerful.
So I'm gonna test you on something, and this I'm gonna make this as a point. What is the average meal cost at Glorietta? You remember this conversation you had with me one time? We were talking about this. Yeah, I still remember this. I'm in a meeting in David's office, and we got talking about camp ministry, and one of the camps they've taken over and repositioned at Glorietta, right? And David asked this fellow I was with, "What's your average meal cost?" I had no clue what the average meal cost was. And David says, "Our average meal cost is $12.46. You need to be at that number." I'm like, who in the world knows the average meal cost for David Weekley did?
I got pretty involved in the camps. We were bleeding money, and we had to turn it around. So,
hey, let me ask you this a final question. So, David, you've had an incredibly successful career, and been able to manage, really large resources, and a lot of us in business have been able to do that. But what if you're single mom, you got 3 kids, you're just getting by. Well, what counsel would you give that person in terms of giving?
Well, I was going to say they can always give their time, but a single mom with 3 kids has no time, right?
True.
And so to me, what they do have is talent, right? We have 3 gifts: time, talent, and treasures. They do have talent. And where could they use their talent to the greatest effect in something they have a passion for?
Right.
I really do believe that true joy is found when we take what we've been given and re-gift it, so to speak, whether it be our time, our talent, or our treasure. And so, as you were describing people that I'd impacted or been involved with, I've been blessed beyond however I bless them, right? And so the joy that you get in the involvement, just like you and JH Ranch, I mean, seeing the impact that you can help create and impacting other people's lives is just an incredible joy.
Yeah. I will. Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, the benefit of giving far exceeds any other joy that we get. And like you say, utility of money at some point goes down, and you're like, okay, God, what do we do here? And how do we really make an impact in a way that brings great fulfillment and helps others? So becoming other focused, as you said on the front end, David. Hey, David, I want to thank you for your time. I'm going to close this in a prayer. Really appreciate you, David, as a friend, a person, a mentor to me, and really a great example, I think, to people in the marketplace using their gifts or talents or time treasure to really make an impact for the kingdom and for helping others that need help, and using our gifts and our talents, as you said, using our experiences in business, in the marketplace, to help nonprofits and ministries. And it's been my experience. Some are willing to accept that, and others aren't. I had a good friend of mine, a young fellow that I kind of mentor a little bit, and he was meeting with a pastor in his church, and he's like, I said, well, some churches don't know what to do with an entrepreneur. And he said, that's exactly right. I couldn't explain to the pastor how I was thinking about it. He's a growth guy. And I said, well,
the other issue is they might be right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, they may be. Exactly. So anyway, let me close this in prayer. Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for David Weekley. Thank you for this time together on this call, and for each person on here. And Lord, we thank you for every gift that you provide us, and for the opportunity you give us to steward and manage your resources well. It's all yours. And I pray for each person on this call that we'll be reminded of the greatest gift of all, and that is of Jesus Christ in this season. And it's in his name we pray, amen. Thank you, David.
Amen.
Thanks for all of you that are on this call.
Thank you. God bless.
God bless. See you.